Slip joints, and one exception. I saw Patriot Knife and Tools video today, and I was incited to make a response. Not to say anything in particular in response, but I just liked the video, and I thought, well, I can show some slip joints. So a week ago today, I went on a really nice shopping trip. I had a knife and tool haul from a local junk store, and I've showed some examples through the week of things I got there: a hewing axe and an interesting Native American knife. I also got these two pocket knives. They just gave them to me in the end. And this one has this wonderfully well-used and sharpened blade, sharpened half out of existence. The secondary blade, I have not been able to extract what is there of that, but it's pretty much gone, as is one of the bolsters. And I can't make out any tank stamp. Maybe I can see a kind of a shape. There's like a zigzag shape there. Doggy, be quiet, will you? Shush, I'm on social media. Please. Right. This one is totally rusted open. Again, not much of a secondary blade going on there. And haven't been able to extract that. The scales are from some marvelous old synthetic that has been variously stained and chipped and melted, it looks like, maybe left on a stovetop there, otherwise brutalized. But it's beautiful. And the escutcheon. And so I see these and this one as potential projects. And these three as knives that are fine just as they are. This I also got last Sunday at the sports shop. The Cold Steel Kudu Lite. It has one of these external back springs, and it is a complete and utter rip-off of an Okapi, which was a slip joint that was made in Germany for the South African market, and later they moved the whole production and the whole business out to South Africa, and I believe they still make the Okapi knife out there. And I have one somewhere, a little one. And they're great. Traditional cheapo pocket slip joint that is very slicey and easy to sharpen and all that stuff. Now, this is a stainless. It's an 8CR13 MOV, I believe, from China. $10. So I pulled out these knives. Really, this is the one I want to spend most time on, so I should probably hurry up. But I thought that this was an interesting one for comparison, because I see this as a kind of a working man's back pocket knife from back in the day that was really made to be used and be functional. And so that some of the hallmarks that I see of that are this very thin, slicey blade, compared to what's typical today in a folding knife. This is extremely slicey. And it's, large and wide, and it's got this nice clip point on it. And so then when you compare that to this, well, something that's going on here is, the fit and finish is, it's not all there, right? And so when I look at this, it occurs to me, I realize looking at this, well, of course, all I need to do is grind off this part here, and then you'll actually have this taper out here, not as dramatically as on this one, but this tapering out that you have there, which makes for a far more attractive clip point blade, in my opinion, and more functional, really, as well. Although, of course, then also you get into see the angle, the sweep of the blade. This is kind of flat to the handle. So I'm thinking, well, if I could modify this, I would like to have a sweep on this like that, maybe. So we'll see about that kind of thing. All kinds of ideas for this thing. Change the handle is a big one, right? Switch out this piece of plastic for something nice. And just keep all there. It's a fairly simple project for me in principle that might only take me, a month or something. So This is a beautiful old, I beg your pardon, it is an Imperial, right? I just think this is a gem. It's so simple and so well made, and boy does it cut. It cuts. Ha! It cuts and sharpens easily, of course, with this nice ultra slicey carbon steel. Oh. So yeah, this is interesting. I would like to make that grinder. So my point was going to be, here's something that is interesting to me. The compound distal taper. The spine is thinner here than it is there, right? It thickens out and then it thins in again. You see this on a lot of clip points, and I have a very exaggerated version of that on my bush knife, where it has a kind of a hook bill area here, and it's tapered in here, and then it thickens out here to kind of a hatchet type thing. So that catches my eye, and of course, this doesn't have that, but it will when I grind this. I'll be grinding down, so here, the metal will be thinner, and then as you get back up, it'll thicken out. So I just thought that was interesting. And a look at this area, because let's have a look at this from a maker named Denis Cherevichnik, who has a YouTube channel, which is very undersubscribed, I would suggest, and that you might want to go and check him out. He's a very interesting guy, very talented, very skilled knife maker, knife historian, working out of Riga and I think London, or I think he's back and forth between various countries, plying his trade. And he makes these knives and sells them on Etsy, and they're somewhat historical reproductions. Although the historicity of this one, I think there's a question that we could get into, because this is somewhat a reproduction of this kind of this is also a reproduction, but this is a very faithful reproduction of the Navaja Española, which, notwithstanding the name, was originally made in France and sold in Spain and popularized thereby. So this is an Aitor Aniversario, and it is not a slip joint, but I would call this a cousin of the slip joint. It's the Caraca knife, the ratcheting knife. So I'll just be careful about this part. Yeah. And it doesn't have a detent mechanism here. So the way they do it is they just make it not centered. I think this, you could consider that deliberate, right? Because there's a friction fit here. It's a really good detent until you get there, but there's no there's nothing here detaining the blade. It's just the fact that it's pressed up against one side here, and that's tuned. That's finely tuned, right? So that you're not checking on the edge. You have the side of the metal rubbing against the brass. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's good, in my opinion. And this is the interesting ratchet feature, the Caraca. This would be a tres Caraca, but they made them with any possible number of serration, or teeth, or whatever. This would be cogs, right? What are they called? Brain fart. Anyway, these elements that would, you could maybe have a knife that, but yeah, this one has the simple 3 there. And it's a very thin, slicey piece of Damascene steel. So I consider this tip to be extremely intimidating. It looks incredibly stabby, but it might be a one and done for stabbing with this thing, because I don't see how this tip could be robust enough for this to be a dyed-in-the-wool fighting knife. It's a kind of a reproduction. And I point that out because you look at the stock on this. I believe this is a forged blade, by the way, hand forged. I'm not entirely certain, but I seem to recall reading that. And so yeah, Sol Luther, he does the whole thing. So let's do this little comparison here of these profiles. So again, speaking about the compound taper, this has a kind of a compound distal taper that thins in here and then it thickens out again at the tip. And correspondingly, the grind, it's flatter in here, and out here it kind of rounds out, becomes more convex and more bulbous. It's fascinating what he's done. And I would consider that highly functional, because the strength that you have here is then maintained all the way up to this point practically, because of the way that it thickens out. I don't know how easy that would be to make out, but I think you can kind of make it out. Perhaps if I go like this. See how it thickens out there? It's awesome. And I use this, I've used it for a bit of woodworking, I made some little cutting tests with it, and it's a wonderful knife. I used it for scraping, and I'll get back to that actually, because I'd like to just look at a few more of the features on the knife. The way that he's done these pins is interesting. This is old world knife making, I guess. I'm not an expert, but he is, by his account, and I believe him. I believe him. I listened to some of his videos and I looked at his stuff and I said, I really got to try this. This seems like it's something that I would really like and enjoy. Although I don't know how much practical use I will find for this knife, but over the years, it's built to last. So look at this union here. It shows up way more on the camera, actually, than it does in real life, I would say. It's practically invisible, but certainly you can see how clean that is. That's also why I raised the specter of the $10 knife with this thing here, right? The carbon fiber is the nod to modernity, as it were. This is a traditional rattlesnake tail design. And it's an easy pinch open. Closing, I have to be careful. And think about how I'm going to do this on camera. Basically, so what I've deduced is there's no way I can do it. It's so strong that there's no way I can do it like this. I have to have a hand here. But what I do is I've got my elbows locked in now, locked into my ribs, and I'm just breaking it. See, and then I can hold on to it and make sure that it doesn't. So it is. It's definitely, I would say, even a challenge to close it safely and comfortably. But this is maybe the 15th time, let's say, that I've closed it, or the 30th, or whatever it is. We're not up to 100. Yeah, give it time. It may also free up a little bit. Scraping. There is an interesting channel that I found. I only watched one of the videos, but the video I watched was about Anton Stradivarius and his scrapers. Yeah, the violin maker. And the channel is called Cremona Revival. So Stradivarius was from Cremona, and this fellow is a historian, and he has access to a lot of interesting information and artifacts, including some of, allegedly, not really contested, but there's just no way to know for sure, some scrapers that belonged to Stradivarius that he would use for working on instruments. And this was very interesting to me because in my experience, working with a little bit and learning from a luthier, my friend and mentor, Julien, he uses scrapers, and he showed me how to make and use these scrapers that are made from thin stock, something like an old carbon steel saw blade, or an old scraper, indeed, one of the ones with a handle or whatever. But they're little pieces of odd shapes, so that you can scrape into different corners or do different things. So that you have them all different sizes and what have you. And because it's very thin, it's very easy to just raise a burr on one side, and then you use that burr for scraping until you wear it out, and you raise the burr again. And that's how you work with that kind of scraper. And so I'd assumed that must go back to the day, because the man who showed me that comes from a village of violin makers in France with generations and generations of violin makers. And so they have long established traditions. And actually the video alluded to this, how it's a very different scraper, what he was using, Stradivarius was using back in the day. And it was a broken knife blade that would appear to be a broken fighting knife. And so the suggestion from this content creator is that these were knives that were broken in duels, and whereby it was established that there was a very high carbon steel and it was brittle, and so it was would make for a very good scraper. And I would also posit that a strong possibility that those blades were broken by the bladesmith. He made the blade and he put it in a vise and cranked on it to test it, and it snapped. And then he said to his apprentice, "Here, take this and give it to Stradivarius to see whether he'll give you something for it," or whatever. He collects these, right? He collects these broken knife blades, all shapes and sizes, and he uses them for scraping, for making musical instruments. Well, I found that fascinating, and I found that this knife, which is not very slicey, especially up here at the tip, but it has a very thick bevel on it. I mean, it's fairly thick behind the edge and then a steep bevel, is what I mean to say. And it's very well done. It's very sharp. But if you're whittling with it, you got quite what would that be, an oblique angle? But scraping, it works marvelously. And I'm just thinking, well, how is it that this scrapes so well? Is it to do with the geometry of the bevel? It could well be, but I think that something it certainly must have to do with is that bevel has backup, right? Because when you're scraping, you're stressing this tiny little thing, but area. But on this kind of a blade, it has a lot of backup, right? Turtles all the way down. It's backed up, right? And so maybe it's because harmonically what happens, I can get a knife that is way sharper than this, and so in principle it scrapes better. But if I start to really go with it, it'll start to chatter. And then it leaves these chatter marks on the piece, and you have to try and scrape them out at a different angle and so forth. And this thing just smoothly plows. And I think that has to do with the mass behind the edge that's going, directly behind the edge. And there's a lot of it, right? And just consider it, because I may not very well know what I'm talking about, and everyone else may well know much more about this than me, in which case tell me more. But it's interesting that this is still not that thick, let's say, by today's standards, by like a survival knife or what have you standards. But it's very wide in this direction, and that gives it a lot of strength, and I think it gives it superior characteristics in most ways to the other format, something that's stockier and not as wide. And sorry about the finger marks and everything, and thanks for watching. Let's do this closure one more time. There we go.